I will call this city council meeting to order. If you can please rise for a moment of reflection and the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen? Here. Mrs. Hoover?
Here.
Ms. Royce?
Here.
Mrs. Bowling?
Here.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Here.
Mr. Gerton?
Here.
Mr. Braden?
Here.
We have all members present this evening. Moving on to amendment of the agenda. We are removing the minutes of the previous meetings. We are also removing the Finance Committee meeting that appears as item number 1. The DEI Advisory Board that's item number 4. And the Finance Committee report, item number 6. So, under committee reports, 2, 3, and 5 will remain. 1, 4, and 6 are being removed. Mrs. Bowling.
I would also like to request that we remove the small business report, just
So,
because I
item
don't have
5?
access. Yes, thank you.
Repeat that one more time, sir.
Yes. So, the minutes are being removed. And then under reports of standing committees of council,
Yes, sir.
item number 1, number 4, number 5, number 6.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Mr. Gerton.
I make a motion to amend the agenda as stated.
Motion by Mr. Gerton to amend the agenda as stated. Mr. Braden.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to public hearings. We have several this evening. Notice of public hearing, Norwood City Council. Notice is hereby given that this Norwood City Council, Hamilton County, Ohio, will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, December 23rd, 2024 at 7:30 p.m. at Norwood City Hall, second floor council chambers, 4645 Montgomery Road, Norwood, Ohio, 45212, on the items listed below. Persons interested in being heard will be allowed to speak during the public hearing. The text for the above listed items has been available for public inspection in the office of the City of Norwood Building Department, Norwood City Hall, Monday through Friday between the hours of 8:30 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. The first 5 items are pertaining to PLK, and before we dive into each of those, it is my understanding that Mr. Lingenfelter has some information to share.
Figured this out last time. Now that Nick is not here.
No.
So what I wanted to cover quick, because there's a lot of, sorry, let me start over again. Nick Lingenfelter, Chief Development Officer for PLK Communities, wanted to cover the request in front of you because there was a lot, and try to summarize it for everybody to understand exactly what the requests are, why they're happening in that order, and what we're trying to achieve. So what I tried to summarize here was there's a couple different requests. The first one is for phase 2. So you look at the top line item, 4590 Beach Street is just our phase 2. That's the hotel, mixed-use building, and parking garage. That's effectively pretty close to what has always been on the site. We're requesting the preliminary and final there so we can finalize our negotiations with the hotel and start our design on the garage because it's being delayed at the moment. Then we also have what we call North Robertson, or the North Multicolor Parcel. That property is currently under construction. We're in the middle of cleanup, but that site is where the infrastructure feeds to Phase 2, so detention, utilities, everything else. So what we're requesting is the preliminary and final on the north only. We understand there's a lot of concern with the south. The south parcel, which just so happens to have the same address, which is why a lot of people, I think, are confused, but we specifically list out the parcel number. At this time, we're not requesting anything. Now, what happened was because Planning Commission referred it over, it's still on the agenda. That site, at this time, though, we don't need anything. We're just trying to move forward with the north parcel only. That's the 70-some-odd townhomes and the infrastructure to be able to start the hotel, parking garage, and that main road extension. So at this time, though, all we're requesting before council is just the original Phase 1, then they're going to make it expand to just Multicolor North, and then you have to finalize Multicolor North. It's a 3-action step because the north parcel is technically had different owners and now it needs to be added in. So you'd be adding in the north only and you'd be finalizing basically those 2 phases for the north parcel and Phase 2. Everything to the south, we're okay delaying, we're okay even turning it down right now if we need to come back with something new, if it has to be done in that action. But just understanding that Planning Commission had referred it to you in that order, which is why you are seeing it right now. That's why I said last time, we're fine having a community meeting, we're fine going through all of those steps, but I can't stop what Planning Commission made the recommendation for. So that is why it's in front of you. There's also the north parcel, the original Phase 2 parcel had been heard in Planning Commission, I want to say it was September. So we've already actually extended this 30 additional days. So we're at the point now, we've been a pretty significant delay on that, trying to make sure it was all there. Primarily because that Multicolor North parcel is the utility and infrastructure. Again, I can't put a road in, I can't get my utilities in, I can't get anything in without running it through that parcel. Until that north plan is approved, I can't do anything. So that's why we have the request in front of you. I can go over the site plan again if you'd like. Make sure you have all that. Get frozen, dang it. Sorry about that. But again, when we looked at this last week, this is the Phase 1. Everything you see here is built today. And our Phase 2 is the yellow and the purple. So again, all we're trying to do right now is the north parcel of Robertson. We're trying to do nothing to the south. We're not requesting it. It got referred to you because that's the Planning Commission legal process. So everything to the south of Robertson, we're okay delaying until the neighborhood, everybody meets. We'll come back in the spring, whatever we need to do there. But the north, we need to get pipe, we need to get our utilities in the ground, and we're trying to get that road in place. So with that, I would be glad to take any questions, but I just wanted to make sure you understood there was a whole bunch of items there, but really it's because they were separate parcels and you had to do those actions independently. You couldn't do them as one. When we submitted our application, we only submitted one application, but legally the city had to break it apart. So that's why I think there's a lot of confusion, but I want to be clear, we're not asking for anything south of Robertson at this time. We're fine coming back in a few months, once we meet with the neighborhood. Everything is just north of Robertson. So, yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Lingenfield.
Mr. Brady.
Thank you, sir. So just quick.
Yes, sir.
Go over a few things real quick, just so that I'm not confused.
Absolutely.
Anyone else. You're talking the box in the yellow is part of Phase 1.
Our original phase, it's our original Phase 2.
Original Phase 2.
It's our original Phase 2, correct.
And what are you asking us to do in that yellow right there?
We want to finalize that. So that's the hotel, that's the mixed-use building, and the parking garage.
When you say finalize, what specifically are you asking for us tonight from that site?
From that site, it would be the plans that we have presented. So we submitted to the city, it's a 7-story mid-rise building, 500-plus space parking garage, and hotel, it's a 112-key hotel.
We have not approved that yet.
You have not approved anything there, no.
So we're calling this north of Robinson North. We're calling that north in the purple.
Correct, yes,
The
sir.
purple now, speaking about the box in the purple. We're calling that north, correct?
Yes.
Did utilities run through that? What are you asking us specifically about that, just to approve?
We're trying to finalize that site plan, so it's the street grid and the 70-some-odd townhouse or so that's just on the north, that's
You want
it.
that approved for the townhouse to start construction?
Correct, because all those utilities are tied together. So when we bought this property, US Plain Card only owned half of Kenilworth. So one of the other things is like all those sewers and everything are not, they're not on the same system. So we're trying to make sure they're all tied together and get that utility grid in place.
So everything on this paper that we have this evening, none of this pertains to your development south of Robinson.
There's one. That's what I'm saying, we need to take that one off. So the one
Okay.
south of Robertson, I believe is the 2 acres, 2 point some odd acres to the south. That's
Okay.
that's the one I was saying, like, so the 2.83 is everything south. So that's what we're saying, like, that issue number 5, we're okay delaying that one.
2.83, okay.
And actually, I'll still go to my main chart just so you can see this. So we detailed the parcels. So it's parcel number 206. You see that on there. So parcel 206 is the south. The first issue number 5 here is parcel 206.
Yes, sir. Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Mrs. Franzen.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for explaining this in a nice brief summary, because even going through this, I'm like, I'm pretty sure I know what this is.
Yeah.
But no, it makes complete sense to me, and I want to make sure that you guys can get going on stuff before prices rise even more. I mean, knock on wood, they don't, but I appreciate you coming in and just speaking through the whole thing, because it is, even for someone who has all the information, it is confusing when there's so many different parcels, and I know it's all mostly just shuffling ownership and making sure the utilities work out. So,
Thank you. And I will note too, we did put on here as well, we submitted the traffic study, we've done a parking study, and we've actually done 3 updates for the staff since we've sent it in. But to that south parcel, if there's more information gathered that we need to dig into, please let us know. But I need at least 30 to 45 days to do it. So that's the one thing I would say is if there is something else that needs to be addressed south of there, it just takes a while to turn it. So we'll definitely hold on the south, meet with the neighborhood, figure that out. But I just want to make sure everybody understands, like, we have submitted 3 updates to the traffic study, just making sure we're addressing the city's concerns. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry.
Mrs. Franzen.
Thank you. I just wanted to note also for folks here and for Mr. Lingenfelter, Mr. Gerton had emailed me about doing basically an infrastructure committee meeting that could be a way for people to come and talk to you and us, have it be a little more informal time. So that's something I will be scheduling to talk about south of Robertson and also just other concerns with Factor 52. So I'm going to be scheduling that later on this evening during new business. Just wanted to give you a heads up on that, and I figure I can coordinate with you or anyone else with PLK to see what times and days work. It would be after the holidays. So we have plenty,
Yeah.
not plenty, but we have time to talk that out. So I just wanted to let you know and let everyone else know that that will be happening after the first of the year. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Hoover.
For clarity, I had actually already put that into the small business and infrastructure meeting, or small business and economic development. It didn't make the agenda due to technical challenges. Do we want to put it in that committee? Would it be better in infrastructure?
I almost think,
Sorry.
Mrs. Bowling.
thank you, I don't want to be out of order. I almost think in this case, because so many of the concerns are traffic and infrastructure related, it might make more sense in infrastructure. I don't,
I'm
Mrs. Hoover.
not sure that it matters.
I know, I don't
We could also
either.
put it in housing, we could put it in finance. We're gonna have 2 other big developments happening, so we should invite them to whatever committee we put this in.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yep. Yeah, I think probably we can talk about that in new business and figure that out, but I had a question for you, Mr. Lingenfelter, and then it's escaped.
Okay.
It was nothing to, I remember it, okay. It looked like you were going to add that connection to Harris Avenue, potentially?
On the backside through our
On the
property?
backside, yeah.
So that, we've talked about that when
Yeah.
the group came in with the Council for New Urbanism. We've worked
Right.
with a few groups there. At this point right now, so once we finalize the design for the garage, we can figure out how that connects.
Okay,
But we hit pause on everything until we know that we're approved, because
gotcha.
we've been spending a lot of money. We're like, we gotta know what we can do. So,
Absolutely. Well, I wasn't,
Yeah.
it looked like, but I knew that there was some discussion about with the garage, so thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, we've actually had a different, bigger plan, but we'll share that when we get there. So.
Awesome, thank you.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Thank you. Can you walk through the logistics of the 3 easements on Robertson, on kind of bringing in the traffic study to those and the needs and all of that?
Can I go stand up there real quick and show you?
Oh, yeah.
So, let me go to the side play. It's my little easier. So, how about these 3 access points?
Yeah.
Can everybody see that? I'm sorry. So the one furthest or closest to Robertson, the bridge. We spent a lot of time figuring that out. So it's an ODOT bridge. Cincinnati on one side, ODOT in the middle, Norwood on the other side. So speed was a major concern. So what we did was we looked at a plan and said, okay, as this builds out, we don't have what's called a traffic warrant now. A warrant's the trigger for a stoplight, but everybody wanted to slow down. So what we did is we came as close to the bridge as ODOT would allow us to do that, so at some point, we can actually add a stoplight in there and slow the traffic down as it's coming into Norwood. The other thing is that's also got the 2 lanes that merge into one. So the intention is we would actually use the right-hand lane to decel and pull directly into the property, forcing it down to 1 earlier on the bridge, not making people speed up on the Norwood side of the road. The other 2 are purely just fire and emergency access, because we don't want everybody dumping out the same direction. But what I would note is the primary traffic loop, as we looked and said, okay, we exit everybody out here, it actually makes it worse. So what we want to do is kick people directly over to Oakley as quickly as we can, if that's where they're exiting to, or we want them to go down the other roads to leave town. So these really are just emergency and basic services for the people. I mean, you're servicing about 7 townhouses.
Mr. Gurton.
Yeah, Mr. Lincolnfelter, I had some questions about bike and walkable paths. Do you have any information on what's currently in your plan that would enhance walkability or bikeability?
So all of our sites, and we have this all over the property, we have multiple bike racks throughout. We continue that expansion. Every building we build has bike rack rooms in it. Actually, in the parking garage, there's an additional bike rack room outside of the ones outside. Holds about 60 bikes, I believe. So yeah, that's a continued, the more we can get people to bike, use Uber, use things like that, and not be bringing the traffic, the better. Ultimately, I mean, I can't stop people from bringing Uber, but the intention is to make this as connective as possible. And we did work with the group, with the CNU group. I was not available for the first meeting, I was out of town, but I was able to attend independently with them and Mr. Powers and walk through like how we can tie it through our site. And actually their plan that showed it through our site was based on this site plan.
And that's compatible with not anything, but that's compatible in the future if there's an expansion of that path?
Correct. So the road, even the one that comes down there on the far right-hand side on Robertson, the intention is that we keep the bikes on a certain side of the road. We've really worked through the best way to tie all that together and make it as walkable as possible. One of the things we started with ODOT as well as the bridge, I've worked with NOAA Powers, and we've been trying to get them to redo the whole bridge and make it more family safe and walkable. Because the more that we can do, like, it's really dangerous right now, it's pretty crazy, but we've had the entire ODOT team down here from Columbus and walk the bridge with them and requested that they clean all that up. It's just like a 4 to 5 year process, and we can't go fix it for them. I even said, can we just put a new sidewalk in? They said no. So the more that we can do that, though, we absolutely want it to be more bikeable and walkable.
Thank you, I appreciate that, sir.
Mrs. Hoover.
I had a question regarding the egress on Robertson. I know a gentleman had come in, he lives directly across from one of those potential spots, and was wondering if we'll be able to do, or you'll be able to do anything to mitigate light into his home, like by having curves or plantings
Yeah,
or...
very valid argument. What I'd actually tell you is there's between 8 and 12 feet of grade change. So most of the cars are going to be pointing downhill as they exit. So it's not, the one thing we've looked at that as well. So if you're coming there, the houses are actually high, and the multicolor site drops almost 12 feet on the far right-hand side. So as they're leaving, they'll actually be going downhill, pointing kind of down from the houses as they're leaving.
Thank
If you actually drive by in Robertson right now, you can see how much higher it is. So they're going to cut that down at an angle.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right.
Can I clarify one thing? So that's, we do not need approval for number 5 on the first one, and we're not asking for anything on number 6 and M. So just to verify, those are the two parcels. Number 6 and M says the multicolor south. We're not requesting anything there. And number 5 above, again, we're okay declining it, sending it back, whatever you want to do.
Mr. Braden.
I guess, I'm sorry, probably wrong time to make the motion to table that, right? We're in a public hearing.
Yeah, when we get to
Okay, thank you.
that item. Correct. Yes. All right, moving on to the first public hearing. This is placement of a planned unit development overlay zoning district over the property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach Street, Norwood, Ohio, 45212, 6.48 acreage, Hamilton County Auditor's Book 651, page 0019, parcel 0127, located within M2 Heavy Manufacturing Zoning District. I will go ahead and declare this public hearing open. Anyone to speak in favor of this matter, please step forward. Anyone to speak in favor of this matter, please step forward. Anyone to speak in favor of this matter, please step forward. Anyone to speak against this matter, please step forward. If you can, please state your name and address.
My name's Diane Farrell. I live at 2749 Robertson Avenue. I don't know how I'll be able to get in and out of my driveway. Like, I honestly, I don't see how that's gonna be possible. If we're gonna have a traffic light right there, and we've got traffic going both ways, and now we're gonna add an additional lane of traffic coming out. I don't know what the answer is, but it's just really difficult to navigate in and out of our driveways. And it's not an exaggeration, it's difficult now, and this will only increase that level of difficulty. So I don't know even what to ask for, other than consideration of the people that live on Robertson. There's just so much development going on in our area. And honestly, it feels a little bit like we're a sacrifice zone. Like the people on Robertson Avenue, it feels like we don't matter. And we live there and we love it here. And personally, I want to stay here. But I feel a little bit like I'm kind of being pushed out. And it doesn't feel good. And I just really would like to see some way for us to be taken into consideration and to make it easier for us to stay in our homes and live there and be able to navigate safely in and out. So I just hope you would consider us, the people, I don't know how many homes are on Robertson, maybe 12, 15, I don't know. Just please consider us too. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak against this matter? Anyone else to speak against this matter? Seeing none, I will call this,
Good evening. I stand before you today, Bishop James, to make a plea that we make sure that we take a look at every perspective and hear every perspective. As we move forward, I do want to say that I was there with Mr. Lingenfelter when it was just all dirt. And I know there were a lot of challenges made. And I know that their corporation has attempted to answer many of those. And I can personally attest to some of those. But the thing that we have to look at, as I, like many of you, I do support Factory 52. I always have. And there's not one person on the earth that could say, well, Bishop James says that he's in opposition of having Factory 52 or others. I think one of the things that we have to begin to consider is making sure that the residents are given full and ample notices to be able to be brought in as soon as possible. Now, I believe, and I definitely stand with my neighbors, and I say that publicly because that's my responsibility. At the same time, I think that if we do our due diligence as family, I'll call us, I do believe that we can find out much sooner the plans that the developers have, hear their heart, and give them ample opportunity to disclose anything that might become controversial. And so as I take my seat, I just send out a plea, because all of you know that if there's a challenge to be made, I'm going to make it. But I also am trying to learn in my good, ripe old age to be fair and to remember that nobody's perfect, starting with me. But we need to do our due diligence as we work forward with Mr. Lingenfelter and his group, along with our residents, who should be our number one priority, and the heart that they have. And so my plea is that we come together sooner so that we can avoid some of these messes, because that's exactly what we have on our hands. One party thinks one way, another party thinks another way. And Mr. Lingenfelter knows that I want that development to be a success. Because as you all know, I'm coming asking. And I think if we work together and do a better job of hearing the hearts of people earlier, I think we will show people how wonderful Norwood is. And we are a family, and we can work through these difficult issues, and I pray that we will. God bless you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Right, not to speak. Terry Maker, 4335 Beach. I just second what Bishop James says, is maybe if we would have came together, like you guys are talking about, having that meeting between PLK and the residents and council, things would move a lot smoother, because we have so many questions and we can't get them answered in these meetings. So I'm very excited about that. And I think in the future, even with other developments, that might help them move faster, because that's a major complaint, that it's taken them so long to get to a point that they can actually start construction. And part of that I would like to speak of when we do have those meetings is that turn when you're coming around, is it Brotherton there to Robertson, where you're coming over the bridge? It's 35 there, as we discussed before. It's going to be a shocker, because they're not going just 35. When they come around that bend, they don't know what's there, and then all of a sudden there's going to be a stoplight. So I don't know if you can paint on the street, 25 in reflective paint. And then I know also, like, I work in Milford, so when you're going through Harris Park, as you know, there's a lot of speeding traps there. They change the speed limit, but they let you know ahead of time. It says speed ahead, 25. Can we work with Cincinnati to have that, a sign like that put like in front of the storage unit place, so that they know what's coming up? Because I'm fearful that there's going to be accidents there when there's a red light. So that's the kind of stuff we want to talk about at these meetings and kind of figure it all out, get our heads together. So my major concern is safety and pedestrians, bikers, bike, and everyone's safety around this facility, because there's a lot of density there now that wasn't there before. And that's a major concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak against the matter? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't want to speak against, but I have a question for one of our one of our speakers. Is it
All right.
appropriate for me to ask that? I have a question for Miss Diane Farah is her name. Can I speak to you again, ma'am? Sure. Thank you. Would you mind coming up here for 1 second? Thank you. Is it Miss Farah? Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming tonight. So I just got a couple questions. How long have you been on Robertson?
36 years.
36 years. Wow. Yeah, so I'm just curious, you know, as a child, I used to ride my bikes back there, back in the woods, and we had ramps and things like that, and looked at a couple houses there on Robertson. So my question to you is, because I'm really excited about this new development, and I really am, you know, I'm looking forward to it. And you, as somebody who lives there, is there something that we're overlooking? I know you stated that you don't know what there is to do, but is there something specific that you could think of that maybe we could help you? I mean, because I understand you've kind of had it good there with that wall there for that many years. You know, I get that, and now we're getting ready to disrupt your silence there, and I don't want to just be all for this and be disrespectful to you, because I understand where you're coming from. So is there something that you can tell us that would help you a little better?
I'm not a traffic engineer, and I really wish I could think of something that would solve the issue. The area is accident prone. It really is accident prone. And with the more traffic and an additional entrance exit there, I can
get
only
that.
see that being compounded. So
I understand, I feel for you.
I
just,
appreciate
you know,
that, and I wish I had something to offer to say,
Right.
well, if we did this, this would be a big buffer or lessen the severity of the number of accidents, but I'm really not sure.
I hope there's a way that I could be excited about this development and then help you along the way, make you happy as well. So
I
that's what I'm
appreciate
hoping. So I don't want to disrespect you by, yeah, let's do this.
No,
Totally
I
not at all. I
appreciate
respect
that.
your opinion. I'm glad you're here tonight, and I just want to let you know that, I'm happy about this development, but also I see where you're coming from, and that's all. Merry Christmas to you.
Okay, great, thank you. Merry Christmas to you.
Thank you. Mrs. Hoover.
I'm wondering if Mr. Linefleur, if there's anything you could say in regards to that? Is that something that a traffic engineer could find some strategies?
We can request they develop them. At this point, they look at warrants, so that's all about what the state requires. And then we can definitely talk to Cincinnati to see if we can place it on their side. I know ODOT's going to give us a hard time about putting anything on the bridge. Question is, do you put on the bridge and does ODOT even know it? I don't know. There's always that approach, but again, we can ask them to do that. I even wrote down and I know, I'm like, can we ask about a stop sign earlier? But I just don't know if they can do that at the edge of a bridge. We'll just have to figure out, because I know with the stop sign, the visibility from the top of that corner is a little over 300 feet, which they need about 150 to 200. So we have the visibility, but I don't know any other strategies that they could do, whether it's curb extensions, but that doesn't ease anything there, especially where you're going from 4 to 1.5 just after her home. So I don't know the easiest way to solve it right now, but I can definitely ask him for more.
My recollection is there was the four-way stop, and then, at Robertson and,
Robertson and Beach?
and Beach, thank you, totally out of my head. Currently, is there a stoplight there?
No, not planned currently, because the traffic, here's what we do think.
There was a blinking.
There was a flashing light at one point, that went away before we came in.
Okay.
Yep. But again, the flashing light, I don't really know what that serves. It's just something else for the city to maintain.
Yeah, okay.
Until the actual warrants are there.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak against this matter? Anyone else to speak against this matter? Anyone else to speak against this matter? Seeing as there are none, I will declare this first public hearing closed. Next public hearing is the expansion of the existing 18.673 acreage planned unit development Phase 1 and Phase 2 on the property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4590 Beach Street, Norwood, Ohio 45212, now comprised of Hamilton County Auditor Book 651, page 0019, parcels 0202, 0206, and 0210, to include the property north of Robertson Avenue known as 4500 Beach Street, Norwood, Ohio 45212, 6.48 acreage, Hamilton County Auditor's Book 651, page 0019, parcel 0127, located within M2 Heavy Manufacturing Zoning District for a total of 24.153 acreage. Anyone to speak in favor of this matter? Anyone to speak in favor of this matter? Anyone to speak in favor of this matter? Anyone to speak against this matter? Anyone to speak against this matter? Anyone to speak against this matter? Seeing none, I will declare this public hearing closed. Moving on to the next public hearing. A preliminary planned unit development, or PUD plan, for 4590 Beach Street, Factory 52 PUD development, including property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach Street, Norwood, Ohio 45212, 6.48 acreage, Hamilton County Auditor's Book 651, page 0019, parcel 0127, located within M2 Heavy Manufacturing Zoning District as part of the final planned unit development. Is there anyone to speak in favor of this matter? Anyone to speak in favor of this matter? Anyone to speak in favor of this matter? Anyone to speak against this matter? Anyone to speak against this matter? Anyone to speak against this matter? Seeing none, I will declare this public hearing closed. Moving on to the next public hearing. A final planned unit development, or PUD plan, for 4590 Beach Street, Factory 52 PUD development, including the property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach Street, Norwood, Ohio 45212, 6.48 acreage, Hamilton County Auditor's Book 651, page 0019, parcel 0127, located within M2 Heavy Manufacturing Zoning District as part of the final planned unit development. Is there anyone to speak in favor of this matter? Anyone to speak in favor of this matter? Anyone to speak in favor of this matter? Anyone to speak against this matter? Anyone to speak against this matter? Anyone to speak against this matter? Seeing none, I will declare this public hearing closed. Moving on to the next public hearing. Place a planned unit development overlay zoning district over the property south of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach Street, Norwood, Ohio 45212, 2.839 acreage, Hamilton County Auditor's Book 651, page 0030, parcel 0206, located within a NBD, Neighborhood Business Zoning District. Anyone to speak in favor of this matter? Anyone to speak in favor of this matter? Anyone to speak in favor of this matter? Anyone to speak against this matter? Anyone to speak against this matter? Anyone to speak against this matter? Seeing none, I will declare this public hearing closed. Moving on to the final public hearing for this evening. That is an ordinance amending Part 11, Planning and Zoning Code, relating to smoking, chewing, electronic smoking, and vaping retail product establishments to promote clarity and consistency in policy interpretation, and by directing these types of retail business establishments to appropriate locations and other related changes. Is there anyone to speak in favor of this matter? Anyone to speak in favor of this matter? Anyone to speak in favor of this matter? Anyone to speak against this matter? Anyone to speak against this matter? Is there anyone to speak against this matter? Seeing none, I will declare this public hearing closed, and that takes care of our public hearings for this evening. Moving on to, yeah, there's more, but wait, there's more. Moving on to requests to address council. We do have 3 here. First is Bishop Sonny James. If you can state your name and address, and you have 5 minutes, even though the monitors are not working.
I'll go easy.
All right.
Again, good evening. Let me first say Merry Christmas to all of our residents and to all of our city workers and those that commit their lives to help Norwood advance. Many of you know that we've had our ups and downs, but at the end of the day, we all are blessed with such a privilege to be able to work together. And I count it all joy. I'm especially pleased tonight that my oldest son, Boom Boom, has come to accompany me. I'm not feeling all the best today, but I just want to see us continue to move forward. We've got some tremendous things coming down the pike. Shortly after the first of the year, you all will be hearing more about the Youth Anti-Crime and Gun Violence Initiative, which we are still seeing evidence that this should be a top priority. And I'm so pleased to be able to say that Mr. Powers and the mayor and many of you have really stepped up to help with some of our initiatives. And if we can continue to work together, I'm really positive that the narrative and the things that we used to hear of old will be no more. So I want to announce that we're going to start doing more of just saying hello campaigns. That means starting even coming into council chambers. People are watching us. People see how we deal with each other. And when we can't even say hi to one another, it really takes people, makes them feel hopeless. Because if you can't speak to me, you certainly can't work with me. And people know the challenges that we face as a city. But guys, I will put Norwood now up against some of the best of them. Proudly do so. I'm so grateful that our mayor, I still get phone calls about the first Fred Shuttlesworth March that we did. And I just want us to continue to work together. We're increasing our diversity in this great city, and I'm so proud of everyone who plays a part and a role in that. I'm so used to the Bishop James monitor, I'm not sure, but I'll go ahead and close. It's not on, but I just want you all to continue to prepare the way for some of our great leaders. I just happen to be the proud father of one of them. And that we can come together, guys, and we can support one another. And this coming year, when we do our Hearing Every Perspective, I know your schedules are busy, so is mine. Let's work on each other's agendas. Let's put a lot of the stuff behind us, so we can show off and brag, not just in Cincinnati, but all over the country, possibly all over the world. So get ready right after the first of the year. We're coming together with more things, and that many of you know that I am going after $1 million donors. I've landed already my first, and we have some right here that, we can work together and come together and make it happen. So let us just pray for each other. Let's pray for the families that are hurting during this season. And let's pray that this city will be blessed by God to take off and do great things. God bless you all and Merry Christmas.
Thank you. The next request to address council is Brian Ferrer.
Brian Ferrer, 2700 Ida Avenue. I I didn't stand during all of the public hearing motions, figuring I'd already put in a request, and I can do this real quick at one time. As far as the Zone 3 goes, you said that we're not really worried about that now. I still am, but if you're going to make a motion on the PUD for Zone 3, I say put the PUD in anywhere. The more control Norwood has as a city gives those of us that are residents in the neighborhood more of a voice. As far as any of the planning meetings go, looking at the first part of the public hearings notice, it says Tuesday, December 23rd. Today's Monday. So it's these kind of little details that make a big difference when putting out notifications to the public. Well, is it Tuesday the 24th? Is it Monday the 23rd? It's a minor detail here, but it's something that when notifications go out, albeit short as they are, some of the notifications I've gotten have arrived a day before meetings. We can't always trust the post office. We may need to figure out something more, even if it's a neighborhood call list, saying, hey, those of you that actually live in the attached properties and around, say, within a block or so radius, make some phone calls to us. Let us know. Thirdly, I did see some minutes and notes regarding the Phase 3 that was delivered to the council, and PLK termed it a blighted and underused property. I have a major concern with the word blighted. It was a parking lot with a nice wooded tree area behind it. Until they came in and bulldozed a lot of the trees out and most of the brush, there was nothing blighted about it. Underused, well, that would be an argument for a different day as to who considers it underused and what the use should be. So, again, just repeating that if you're voting on any of the PUDs or any of those areas, I'd say the more control Norwood has, the more control us citizens have over what goes in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the final request to address council is Diane Farrell.
I'll save my comments and questions for our meeting when we go to infrastructure or wherever it's placed.
All right. Thank you. Moving on to reports of standing committees of council. The first is the Housing, Health, Environment, and Public Safety Committee meeting from December the 20th.
Pardon me, which one?
I guess the wrong date is listed.
November.
Never mind.
Okay. Sorry.
The November one.
Making sure I wasn't losing my mind. To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we, your Committee of Housing, Health, and Public Safety, to whom was referred a warming center for Norwood, beg leave to submit the following report. Had a presentation on warming center concept from Charlene Myers, Focus Cincinnati, for a location at Christ Temple Full Gospel Baptist Church on Williams and Ellesmere. Respectfully submitted, Susan Hoover, Ms. Alexis Royce, and Ms. Candace Winterbauer.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
I move to accept the committee report.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to accept the committee report. Ms. Royce.
I'll second.
Seconded by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Garten?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the next report, that is DEI Advisory Board from November 21st.
Thank you, sir. To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we, your Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Board, to whom was referred the goal of providing advice and support for the city's work to become more diverse, equitable, inclusive, and anti-racist through its policies, practices, and programs, beg leave to submit the following report. Planning and discussion of MLK blood donation on January 11th from 10 to 12, and a week of service of January 19th. We spoke with HR, who reported that the city is not able to provide comp time for board members. And we will continue discussion on welcoming week and calendar planning. Respectfully submitted, Susan Hoover, Ms. Alexis Royce, Ms. Shireen Elsasser, and Ms. Ashton Tucker.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
I move we accept the report.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to accept the report. Mrs. Franzen.
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Franzen. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item, and that is third readings of ordinances or resolutions. And we have a resolution authorizing disposal of personal property and declaring an emergency. Ms. Royce.
I move we have the third reading.
Motion by Ms. Royce to have the third reading of the resolution. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to ask for a little Christmas joy here this evening. I don't know if there's any hurry on this, and if there isn't, I would like to ask a favor of you all, maybe to just shelf this until next meeting. Give me one meeting. I sent you all an email just prior to the meeting with some information, and I'm still working on that, and I wouldn't mind having one more meeting to discuss this with everyone, if you would grant me that, just maybe a stay until next meeting for this item. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So I'll be making a motion to table it until the next meeting. If that's
currently-
okay with everybody. If that's
Braden.
reasonable, I would appreciate if you guys would vote yes on that.
We currently have a motion already by Mrs. Bowling and seconded by Mrs. Hoover to have the third reading, if they would be willing to amend.
That wasn't my motion.
I appreciate that, Mr. President. Thank you.
That was my bad.
We look so much alike.
I know. So that, I will defer back to Ms. Royce and Mrs. Hoover.
I mean, I feel like we've debated this a lot. We debated it when we passed the ordinance. We've talked about it the last 2 times. I'm comfortable having the third reading tonight, but if everyone else wants to table, I mean, I'm not opposed to amending my motion, but I don't feel compelled to amend it at this moment. Unless everyone else wants to, besides Mr. Reed.
Mrs. Bowling.
I mean, I'll say, I feel pretty comfortable voting on this, but I think there's no harm in giving us more time if Mr. Braden feels like there's work that he'd like to do for it. I don't
Thank you.
see.
Thank you, Ms. Bowling.
Unless there is something on the administration side where they are in a hurry. It's not my motion to amend, but I don't feel strongly about it one way or another.
Ms. Royce.
Would the mayor or Mr. Powers like to speak as to how quickly we need to get this done?
Mayor Schneider.
I'd love to chime in on
Bud.
it. This was something that was an initiative of mine from long ago. Not the city not putting more guns on the street. And as a mayor, I worked with the police chief, and we did basically something on YouTube or on Facebook where we did a seminar in the community saying how to make guns safe. And I'm not against guns, but I am against the city of Norwood selling guns. And that's what this all comes down to. This comes down to our police department that has to go out and be faced with guns being pointed at them, maybe taking a police officer's life, maybe taking another person's life. We're going to put more guns out there. And I don't understand why council members, I understand why one council member says, let's not do this. But I don't understand why others aren't standing behind your decision. That we want more handguns out in society. I think there's tons of them, and they're being manufactured every day. And there are people that are selling them to people, and they have restrictions. Why would you not stand behind your decision and say, let's move this forward and done with it and move on? Destroy these weapons. Most of these are throwaway guns that some hoodlum had or some kid had that should not be on the street again. And we're saying, no, let's wait. We might be able to make $1,000 off of these guns or $10,000 off these guns. But being in the gun sales business is not what the city of Norwood should be in. Destroy the guns and move on. Stand behind what you're trying to do here. I mean, this goes all the way up to our Senate and Congress, and you're like, why would we be putting more guns in society? Pastor James, Bishop James, is the one that's saying we need to get guns off the street. We need to stop doing it. But now you guys are not going to stand behind it and say, let's eliminate, get rid of this. We're not getting rid of some sort of specialized weaponry that isn't. We're talking about guns that are being produced constantly. Watch the video of people. I just can't believe that you guys would back down from just saying, remove these guns from it. Be done with it. Done.
Mrs. Bowling.
Yeah, so if we do not vote on this tonight, what are we currently doing with guns?
They're stored. They're sitting in a storage place, much like the drugs. The drugs are on here too.
Sure.
Fentanyl. You guys. Oh, let's not get rid of the fentanyl. Let's leave it sit around.
Nobody said that. Nobody said that.
It's
Nobody
connected.
said that.
It's connected.
No, it's not.
This right here is connected. This is a list of all the illicit drugs that will be
Sure.
destroyed also.
So to my point, I know how I will vote on this issue. I feel that I have the information necessary for me to make an educated vote. I am by no means backing down on my stance on this issue. I also think that getting more information about it is not going to harm anything, because we are not, in the interim of voting on it this meeting or next meeting, going to suddenly begin selling them. You know what I'm saying? We're not, if we do not vote on this meeting immediately, those guns will not be recirculated into the community. I also think, while I understand that this resolution is tying those two things together, I don't think that people wanting more information about the value of weapons has anything to do with people wanting to recirculate fentanyl into the community. My perspective is, I know how I would like to vote on this issue. I also do not see harm in giving an additional week, given that or additional 2 weeks, given that in those 2 weeks, we will not be changing how we are handling weapons right now. We will not be recirculating them into the community.
Mrs. Franzen.
I'm fine with just voting on it tonight. I appreciate Mr. Braden's perspective, but for me, I'd rather just get it done. I feel that we've probably discussed enough about it, and I don't see any new information that would change my vote in the next 2 weeks. So for me, I would be fine with just continuing with this motion and just doing the old vote.
Mrs. Hoover.
I just had a point of, I believe, clarification. My understanding is that this was an ordinance that was several years old, correct? But whenever we go to destroy the items, it comes before council. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Mayor Schneider.
Okay. So we have done this, I remember doing it last year on council, voting to have them destroyed, right? I mean, how many years have we done that?
Mayor Schneider.
I've been the mayor for 5 years. This was one of the things that I worked to get in there, probably 2 years into it. So it's been a couple of years
Okay,
that
so
we've
then-
been doing this.
And then once a year, is it once a year that we destroy all the items?
I
Or
don't know that it's once a year per se. It's once they build up and the police department says we need room.
time to get rid of
Yeah.
them? Okay. I'm just wanting to make a point that there were two separate things. One was the ordinance when it was originally created, and now whenever we go to destroy them is another one. Resolution.
Mayor Schneider.
I would request, Mrs. Bowling, what would, if, in 2 weeks from now, what would change your mind to, what kind of research? I mean, I don't know of any research that you could go through and say, well, I priced out every one of these guns and the city's giving away, we're destroying $25,000 or $30,000, but we could put those guns, I don't see where that's going to, maybe that's a question for Mr. Braden, since he's asking for the time to do more research on it, so.
There is nothing in the
I
next.
have a lot to say.
There is nothing that I will vote how I'm going to vote on this with the information that I have. My stance is, if Mr. Braden feels driven to continue to look into this, that information could impact other people's vote. I know how I'm voting on this issue. I know what I think we should be doing with the guns. I also think if people want to dig deeper and look for alternatives, I think that's their prerogative. If we vote on this, I'm comfortable voting on this today. I know how I'm going to vote. I also am not against people doing additional work and looking into issues further.
Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I'm not gonna die on this hill here, but I just, I think there's a lot of false, a couple false equivalents. And, you know, the first thing being that we're gonna dump these guns on the street. That just is ridiculous. The criminals are getting guns. They're not going to Dick's and Walmarts or wherever else sells. They're not going there, and or they might be legally, but these people are getting guns off the streets. When these guns are took to auction or sold, they are on the books. They are legally sold to legal gun owners who are not out robbing and stealing and using these on the streets. So in my opinion, that's a false equivalence. And to compare it to fentanyl or things other is a little, in my opinion, a little fear-mongering to me. But on the other hand, I understand people's opinions. Only thing I'm saying is, and without prolonging this meeting tonight, because I'm ready to go home, I'm looking at an estimate that I've had done, and on the low end is $50,000, and on the high end is 70,000+. So that's what we're destroying here. We're voting on destroying $50,000 on the low end to 70. Also, I have information that there's other weapons that's in the police, but that they have that they're not allowed to sell because of this ordinance in upwards of $60,000 minimum. So with my 70 on the high end, with the 60, which is pretty much base rate what I heard, what are we at, 60, 120, 130? So that, to me, that sounds like 2 police cruisers. And I'm not going to die on this hill, but as we sit here in fiscal emergency and we argue with the state and we want to get out and we destroy $70,000 in materials of crap guns is what I've heard, but $70,000 seems like a lot of money for crap guns. That's the high end. I'm not trying to exaggerate here. I'm not trying to put anything in anybody's mind. I'm just simply asking to look at this money, and it just doesn't make sense that we're people are telling us our roads are bad. They're telling us we need development, but yet we're destroying $130,000. That sounds like 2 police cruisers to me. And I've been told that I have someone volunteering, and I don't expect this to happen, but I have somebody volunteering to do all the work. And I've told, then this is the last thing I'll say here, I'll try to get off, that it is exactly the same amount of energy to take the guns, box them up and destroy them, or take them up, box them up, and send them to the auction. It's the exact same amount of work. They got to do the exact same thing, and it just seems like a waste that this body is voting on that could be prevented. That's all. And that's all I'm saying. I appreciate all of you, and God bless you all, and Merry Christmas.
Mayor Schneider.
Oh, Exhibit A is the guns that would be destroyed. Exhibit B on here is all the drugs. There's a lot of marijuana we're going to destroy. A lot of marijuana. Legal. So maybe we should go back. If we're not going to destroy guns and we're going to be selling guns as a city, why don't we get rid of this marijuana? Separate the marijuana out and sell it to one of the marijuana dispensaries, because we could maybe make 50 to 70,000. Wait, but double that number. And if that's fear-mongering, that's not fear. Fear-mongering is putting more guns out on the street in the city of Norwood selling guns, which we shouldn't be doing. Let Dick's sell all the guns. Let Walmart sell guns. Let the people that are in business selling guns sell guns. But let's not have the city of Norwood selling guns, and let's not sell marijuana. Let's get them off the street.
Current motion on the floor by Ms. Royce, seconded by Mrs. Hoover, is to have the 3rd reading of the resolution. Is there any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have the 3rd reading of the resolution.
A resolution authorizing the disposal of personal property and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Franzen.
I move that we pass the resolution.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to pass the resolution. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last thing I want to say is, I think everything I said was pretty reasonable. I was just asking for one meeting. a courtesy. That's all I would ask. If anyone here asked me for a courtesy, you would get it. To compare what I'm asking to drug selling is a little absurd to me. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Hoover?
I just want to say, Mr. Braden, I do absolutely respect your opinion. I just, with the information, I have a different priority. And for me, while I understand that the money might be as much as $100,000, for me, when I'm having conversations with the police chief about the issues that we are having with guns and illegal guns, the fact that our pawn shop was raided and they stole things, like that's something that is happening everywhere. So I understand that we believe we're selling guns. We would believe we're selling guns to good people, but good people don't always hold on to those guns. One of the big challenges that I'm hearing that the police are dealing with is people leaving their guns in vehicles, and then the vehicles are broken into. And so now guns are, so it's for me, even $100,000 is not worth it. I do understand that we are in fiscal emergency, but that $100,000 is not going to make or break Norwood. And for me, not being in the business of being with guns is why I'm voting that way. But I do respect what you're saying.
Thank you. Mr. Braden?
I'm not asking you to change your vote. I'm just asking for a little courtesy tonight that I would give to you. That's all I'm asking.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Motion on the floor by Mrs. Franzen, seconded by Mrs. Hoover, is to pass the resolution. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
No.
By a vote of 6-1, the motion carries. Moving on to introductory readings of ordinances and resolutions. We have 11 of them this evening. The first is an ordinance approving the final planned unit development, PUD plan, for the property known as 4590 Beach Street, Hamilton County, parcel numbers 651-0019-0206 and -0210, Phase 2 of the development known as Factory 52. Mrs. Bowling.
I move we have the first reading.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to have the first reading. Mrs. Winterbauer.
A second?
Seconded by Mrs. Winterbauer. Any discussion? Mrs. Franzen.
With any of these, is there any reason to do all three readings, or is this something that we should just continue to do the first reading for all of these? I wasn't sure what would be most judicious use of our time since we've had the public hearing. I'm fine with just doing the first reading, though. I didn't know, I guess none of these have an emergency clause or anything like that, so.
Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know that PLK needs these, if the first one is the public hearing that was heard a month ago. And that's the rest of kind of the original plan. 2 through 5 are the multicolor north parcels. The 6th is an ordinance to add a PUD overlay over the south parcel, but not the plans. I know that what Mr. Lingenfelter and has said continuously for several months is that they need these plans approved now. They have contracts ready to start working on the utilities underneath the multicolor site to serve the phase 2 of the Factory 52, the original development site. Those contractors are in line to start in January. And so I know that they are very desperately asking the council pass ordinances 1 through 5 tonight. And it is very, very important to them. Not that I speak for them, but the question was asked, is there any reason why we can't have readings over multiple meetings? From PLK's perspective, it's very, very important that they get those approved tonight for what that's worth.
Mrs. Hoover.
I'm curious if the mayor or Mr. Powers, who are in the planning commission, would have any
Mayor
insight.
Schneider.
I'd love to talk on this subject. 5 years ago, I started as mayor, and we started this project pretty much at that same time, 5 years. And these plans have been coming to the city. The city has been meeting every Thursday. They've been meeting, doing Zoom calls, trying to work with the developer to try to make things happen. So when we talk about Factory 52, somebody said, oh, I was there when it was just a bunch of dirt. Well, I was there when it was a brownfield. I was there when it was the building that was sitting vacant and they were throwing rocks through the windows and everybody was complaining to me saying, hey, vagrants are getting in there. They were saying, this is going to end up being a huge homeless encampment. We have problems all over this property. And we worked hard. And we got PLK in here to work on that. And they got money to clean up a brownfield, to clean up hazardous waste, to clean that property up. And it has been going on for 5 years. This has been going on. People make it sound like, oh, this just started. We didn't know you guys were doing this stuff. We've known it. The infrastructure committee has had meeting after meeting after meeting that involves this. The council has had meeting after meeting after meeting to discuss this. We all knew that the second phase of this was going to potentially include a hotel and the office building in the back, and that potentially the organization was going to move to Norwood. That's been something that's been said for 3 or 4 years. So this isn't something new. This came in front of the Planning Commission. We've had multiple hearings on all of this. And I understand you're getting some pressure from people out there who are saying, well, we just heard about it. It's like, it has been, we've talked about it until we're blue in the face. The Planning Commission has talked about it. Professionals, people that are in this business have been working on these plans for, quite frankly, years. And so, this is not, I keep hearing like this is a bad development for the city of Norwood. And it's like, we could have had the playing card company sitting there. Remember, they filmed a movie in there because it was a dilapidated old building. They filmed a movie in there because they could set off explosions and do different stuff in there. But they cleaned up a brownfield. Then we had the multicolor site, and they pulled out. And it's like, what do we do? Well, going to the multicolor site, as it stood, you just about couldn't breathe. You had to wait until your lungs got acclimated to all the ink smell. And that building is now gone. I delivered papers. John, you rode your bike down there. I delivered papers right down Robertson, probably to the very end house, which was always the one that got the newspaper. I had to walk all the way down there and walk all the way back. And what you heard was that manufacturing plant with all its windows open and loud noises. If you were I always said, I don't know how these people can live in these homes with that big wall there and the emergency escapes and stuff. Removal of that and the development that PLK doing is nothing but good. It is putting these people into a neighborhood that they haven't been in for years. So, I look at these and I say, let's move this along. Let's get this done. This council has the ability to make this happen. Do all 3 readings, move this forward. Let's keep the progress going. We've got challenges. I'm not going to sit here and say there aren't challenges that have to be overcome as we do this, but we're working on them. I mean, there's traffic studies that are going back and forth between our people, between their people. We're working and we'll continue to work on them. But for this, I look at it and say, let's move this forward and let's go.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yeah, I would I would agree with the mayor. I think that we should, at least for the first 5, I want to support PLK's work with this, and I want them to be able to enter into contracts that they can get to as quickly as they can. So because this is just for the north of Robertson, mind you, I feel that we as council, it would be incumbent on us to try to help them as we can, and this is one way that we can help, is speeding up this process since it has been heard so long, and since we have had a public hearing and had the planning commission meet with them. I also note that, of course, having a PUD overlay does give the city some measure of control over the property after this process too. So that's my feeling.
Mrs. Bowling.
Yeah, I'm happy to amend. There was just no request for it, so I didn't initially not ask for it out of some sort of ill will, or they're just.
So
There was
you,
no request for
just to
it.
clarify.
I'm happy to amend to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings.
All right.
Sure.
Mrs. Winterbauer, are you willing to amend your second?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So just to reiterate, the new motion on the floor, the amended motion on the floor by Mrs. Bowling, seconded by Mrs. Winterbauer, is to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings of the ordinance. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all 3 readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance approving the final planned unit development, PUD plan for the property known as 4590 Beach Street, Hamilton County, parcel numbers 651-0019-0206 and -0210, Phase 2 of the development known as Factory 52.
All 3.
Sorry. I have a cold, guys. Ordinance approving the final planned unit development PUD plan for the property known as 4590 Beach Street, Hamilton County, parcel numbers 651-0019-0206 and -0210, Phase 2 of the development known as Factory 52. Ordinance approving the final planned unit development PUD plan for the property known as 4590 Beach Street, Hamilton County, parcel numbers 651-0019-0206 and -0210, Phase 2 of the development known as Factory 52.
Thank you. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Make a motion to pass the ordinance?
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to pass the ordinance. Mr. Braden.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item. Ordinance approving a zone change from heavy manufacturing M2 to heavy manufacturing planned unit development district M2 PUD over the property north of Robertson Avenue known as 4500 Beach, parcel 651-0019-0127, referred to as Multicolor North. Mrs. Franzen.
I move we suspend the rules and have all 3 readings.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all 3 readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance approving a zone change from heavy manufacturing M2 to heavy manufacturing planned unit development district M2 PUD over the property north of Robertson Avenue known as 4500 Beach, parcel 651-0019-0127, referred to as Multicolor North. Ordinance approving a zone change from heavy manufacturing M2 to heavy manufacturing planned unit development district M2 PUD over the property north of Robertson Avenue known as 4500 Beach, parcel 651-0019-0127, referred to as Multicolor North. Ordinance approving a zone change from heavy manufacturing M2 to heavy manufacturing planned unit development district M2 PUD over the property north of Robertson Avenue known as 4500 Beach, parcel 651-0019-0127, referred to as Multicolor North.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
I move we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to pass the ordinance. Ms. Royce.
I'll second.
Seconded by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item. Ordinance approving the expansion of the planned unit development PUD plan area for Factory 52 to include the property north of Robertson Avenue known as 4500 Beach, parcel 651-0019-0127, referred to as Multicolor North. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Make a motion we suspend the rules and have all 3 readings?
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings of the ordinance. Mr. Garten.
Second the motion.
Seconded by Mr. Garten. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance approving the expansion of the planned unit development PUD plan area for Factory 52 to include the property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach, parcel 651-0019-0127, referred to as Multicolor North. Ordinance approving the expansion of the planned unit development PUD plan area for Factory 52 to include the property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach, parcel 651-0019-0127, referred to as Multicolor North. Ordinance approving the expansion of the planned unit development PUD plan area for Factory 52 to include the property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach, parcel 651-0019-0127, referred to as Multicolor North.
Thank you. Mrs. Franzen.
I move we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to pass the ordinance. Ms. Royce.
I'll second.
Seconded by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item. Ordinance approving the preliminary planned unit development, PUD plan, as modified for the property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach, parcel 651-0019-0127, referred to as Multicolor North. Ms. Royce.
I move we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Ms. Royce to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please. Well, Mr. Braden.
Thank you. I'll make sure I'm not confused here. Are we on M6 now?
We are
We're
on
M6.
M4.
M4. Okay, thank you. Continue.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance approving the preliminary planned unit development, PUD plan, as modified for the property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach, parcel 651-0019-0127, referred to as Multicolor North. Ordinance approving the preliminary planned unit development, PUD plan, as modified for the property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach, parcel 651-0019-0127, referred to as Multicolor North. Ordinance approving the preliminary planned unit development, PUD plan, as modified for the property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach, parcel 651-0019-0127, referred to as Multicolor North.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
I move we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to pass the ordinance. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next item, ordinance approving the final planned unit development, PUD plan, as modified for the property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach, parcel 651-0019-0127, referred to as Multicolor North. Mrs. Franzen.
I move we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Mrs. Bowling.
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance approving the final planned unit development, PUD plan, as modified for the property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach, parcel 651-0019-0127, referred to as Multicolor North. Ordinance approving the final planned unit development, PUD plan, as modified for the property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach, parcel 651-0019-0127, referred to as Multicolor North. Ordinance approving the final planned unit development, PUD plan, as modified for the property north of Robertson Avenue, known as 4500 Beach, parcel 651-0019-0127, referred to as Multicolor North.
Thank you. Ms. Royce.
I move we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Ms. Royce to pass the ordinance. Mrs. Bowling.
A second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item. Ordinance approving a zone change from Neighborhood Business District, NBD, to Neighborhood Business District Planned Unit Development District, NBD PUD, over the property south of Robertson, known as 4500 Beach Street, parcel 651-0030-0206, referred to as Multicolor South. Mr. Garten.
I believe this ordinance is just as important as the previous 5, and I make a motion that we have all 3 readings.
Motion by Mr. Garten to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings of the ordinance. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Winterbauer. Any discussion? Mr. Braden.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate that. The only thing that I would like to add is the developer acted like this was going to be taken off of our meeting tonight, and it was okay with that. And there's a residents that want input on this before we vote on it, so I'm confused. I thought we were going to allow that to happen. So you're changing your mind about that, and we're saying we're going to go ahead and you want to vote on that tonight? I'm just making sure, because I thought we were going to table this to a time, because he said he was disconnected south from the north. So I'm just curious if that's the case here.
Mr. Garten.
Could we have somebody from the Planning Commission just kind of give us the implications of what this would do?
Let's let Noah get on that one. I know what the implications are.
Mr. Powers.
Good afternoon or evening. As the chair of the Planning Commission, I can tell you that what this will do is place a planned unit development overlay on this parcel. So if this is passed here this evening, that would mean that the developer would need to come back and go through the same preliminary and final planned unit development process that's gone through with the north parcel. If that's not voted for today, they could build as of right with the underlying zoning that's there now, which is the neighborhood business district.
Mr. Garten.
The text of this specific ordinance also says that this is, that we deem this to be in the best interest of the citizens of Norwood. And I believe that the citizens who have come to the last few meetings who live adjacent to this property believe it's very important that we have the zoning planning commission look at any more plans that come over this property in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion on the floor by Mr. Garten, seconded by Mrs. Winterbauer, is to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings of the ordinance. Is there any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all 3 readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance approving a zone change from Neighborhood Business District, NBD, to Neighborhood Business District Planned Unit Development District, NBD PUD, over the property south of Robertson, known as 4500 Beach Street, parcel 651-0030-0206, referred to as Multicolor South. Ordinance approving a zone change from Neighborhood Business District, NBD, to Neighborhood Business District Planned Unit Development District, NBD PUD, over the property south of Robertson, known as 4500 Beach Street, parcel 651-0030-0206, referred to as Multicolor South. Ordinance approving a zone change from Neighborhood Business District, NBD, to Neighborhood Business District Planned Unit Development District, NBD-PUD, over the property south of Robertson, known as 4500 Beach Street, parcel 651-0030-0206, referred to as Multicolor South.
Thank you. Mr. Garten.
Make a motion that we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Garten to pass the ordinance. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Winterbauer. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to next item. This is an ordinance amending Part 11, Planning and Zoning Code relating to smoking, chewing, electronic smoking, and vaping retail product establishments to promote clarity and consistency in policy interpretation, and by directing these types of retail business establishments to appropriate locations and other related changes. Mrs. Franzen.
I move that we have the first reading of this ordinance.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to have the first reading of the ordinance. Is there a second? Ms. Royce.
I'll second.
Seconded by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Ms. Royce?
I was just curious if Mr. Powers wants to, I didn't have a chance to email him this weekend because I was Christmas shopping. Can you just say does this essentially ban vape shops? I see like the X's underneath the sections, and I just didn't know if that meant they're not permitted in
Powers?
those sense.
So it would be permitted in several districts as a conditional use.
Okay.
So this would be considered Class B retail.
Okay,
And so Class C retail is basically where we do not allow it at all in the city.
Okay.
Class A and Class B are both allowed, but that would require to go to the BZA before one would locate.
so they could still, this just creates the barrier of getting everything approved.
It does create an extra step, that's
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Braden? Never mind. Okay. Motion on the floor by Mrs. Franzen, seconded by Ms. Royce, is to have the first reading of the ordinance. Any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have the first reading of the ordinance.
Ordinance amending Part 11, Planning and Zoning Code relating to smoking, chewing, electronic smoking, and vaping retail product establishments to promote clarity and consistency in policy interpretation, and by directing these types of retail business establishments to appropriate locations and other related changes.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Okay, make a motion, we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
I move we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to pass the ordinance. Is there a second? Mrs. Franzen.
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Franzen. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item. Ordinance making permanent appropriations for the expenditures of the City of Norwood, Ohio for the calendar year ending December 31, 2025, and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Franzen.
I move we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance making permanent appropriations for the expenditures of the City of Norwood, Ohio for the calendar year ending December 31st, 2025, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance making permanent appropriations for the expenditures of the City of Norwood, Ohio for the calendar year ending December 31st, 2025, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance making permanent appropriations for the expenditures of the City of Norwood, Ohio for the calendar year ending December 31st, 2025, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Motion to pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Braden to pass the ordinance. Ms. Royce.
I'll second.
Seconded by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Mrs. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item. An ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a Community Development Block Grant, CDBG, subrecipient agreement with the Board of Commissioners, Hamilton County, Ohio, for a grant for the Crown Avenue Waterline Project, Street Rehabilitation and Improvements Project, and Curb Ramp and Sidewalk Improvement Projects, and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Franzen.
I move we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Mr. Braden.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the ordinance.
An ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a Community Development Block Grants subrecipient agreement with the Board of Commissioners, Hamilton County, Ohio, for a grant for the Crown Avenue Waterline Project, Street Rehabilitation and Improvements Project, and Curb Ramp and Sidewalk Improvements Projects, and declaring an emergency. An ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a Community Development Block Grant subrecipient agreement with the Board of Commissioners, Hamilton County, Ohio, for a grant for the Crown Avenue Waterline Project, Street Rehabilitation and Improvements Project, and Curb Ramp and Sidewalk Improvements Projects, and declaring an emergency. An ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a Community Development Block Grant subrecipient agreement with the Board of Commissioners, Hamilton County, Ohio, for a grant for the Crown Avenue Waterline Project, Street Rehabilitation and Improvements Project, and Curb Ramp and Sidewalk Improvements Projects, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
I move we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to pass the ordinance. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Winterbauer. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Do not have a copy of the... Next item is an ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of not to exceed $20 million of special obligation development revenue funding bonds, Series 2025 Rookwood Exchange Project of the City of Norwood, Ohio, for the purpose of refunding the outstanding special obligation development revenue and refunding bonds, Series 2015 Rookwood Exchange Project, authorizing the execution and delivery of a trust agreement to secure such bonds, authorizing the execution and delivery of the related transaction documents, and authorizing and approving related matters. Mr. Garten.
Make a motion, we have the first reading of the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Garten to have the first reading of the ordinance. Mr. Braden.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Mrs. Hoover, is that a yes?
Sorry, well, I believe, and my eyes are starting to swim, and I apologize. I believe this one is requesting emergency. Is this the one from Mike Skelly? Apologies, is this the?
It does.
Doesn't say.
I don't think I have a
Mr. President?
communication from-
Mr. Moore?
No, this is to refund bonds. This is from Patrick Woodside and our financial advisors, and my understanding is there's no need to pass this tonight. They don't expect it to pass tonight, that Mr. Woodside couldn't be here tonight, but intends to be at the next council meeting to kind of, if anybody's got questions on this.
So thank you.
Yeah.
I'm on the wrong.
Yeah. Mr. Skelly.
Wrong one. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Ms. Royce, I know your hand was up earlier.
No, I thought Ms. Hoover had her hand up. I was trying to get attention for her, and then she put her hand back down.
That was like a three-step process, so
It takes a village.
thank you for the support.
That's what I'm here for.
All right, so motion by Mr. Gerton, seconded by Mr. Braden, is to have the first reading of the ordinance. Any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Spelling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have the first reading of the ordinance.
An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of not to exceed $20 million of special obligation development revenue refunding bonds, Series 2025, Rookwood Exchange Project of the outstanding special obligation development revenue, and refunding bonds, Series 2015, Rookwood Exchange Project, authorizing the execution and delivery of a trust agreement to secure such bonds, authorizing the execution and delivery of the related transaction documents, and authorizing and approving related matters.
Thank you. All right, that takes care of all those. Moving on to administration reports. Mayor Snyder?
My button is green.
I see.
I just left it green the whole time. A lot going on, of course, with the holidays and everything, but the Montgomery Road pedestrian safety plans are all coming through. We continue to look at those. As you guys know, this is a constant process. I mean, Montgomery Road and the pedestrian project has been going on for two years of planning at this point, 2+ years. And we've got a lot of funding in place for that. SORTA's put a lot of interest into it. You know, ODOT's put a lot of into it. We have put a lot of time and effort into it. We're even going back to them. I mean, there were even questions recently this week where, you know, one of the things that came up is as we're replacing, one of the things that was in like Cincinnati Magazine 5 or 10 years ago was they showed a picture of Montgomery Road and all the light posts, and all of them were sort of crookedy, and they were making fun of Norwood as having all these. So we're replacing those light posts, and as I'm going through that, I'm thinking, well, you know, what else should we be looking at? And, you know, now we've got all our holiday lights up. And I thought, well, as they're doing this, they need to make provisions for holiday lights in the future, so we don't put all these light posts in, and these are the simple things that get overlooked, that we need to work on. I mean, we're looking at like raised pavement markers on Montgomery Road, on the double yellow lines. Like if you drive down Montgomery Road and it's rainy and it's dark, it's hard to tell where the actual island is or where the lane is. So maybe putting some of those in specific spots to help out. So there's a lot of that, and then we're looking at their tree plan and trying to get the tree board sort of involved in that, and I know they've already sort of been involved, but, and then we're looking at some different things, like should there be a left turn into Surrey Square at one place, and maybe it should be right turn only into other places, which keeps the traffic flow going. So there's a lot of time and effort put into the planning for that stuff, and we continue to sort of nitpick it until the end. But I think we're going to end up with a really nice project out there. So the first phase, of course, will start this summer, and that's with putting some of the bump outs. When the pedestrian improvement project is bumping out some of the curbs and moving them out. It is a little bit of a road thinning, and when people say, oh, well, that's going to slow traffic down, you're not going to be able to flow through there as quickly. Okay, but that's okay. You don't need to go 50 miles an hour down Montgomery Road. So we've got a lot of projects. And then this time, when they repave, if you think about it, the last time they repaved was in the early 2000s. So it was 2002, 2003, and then I think it was 2005. They did it in 3 segments, and we never ended up with Montgomery Road just newly, freshly paved and beautiful all the way from Corp Line to Corp Line. So this time, when they pave in 26, they'll be paving from Corp Line to Corp Line and incorporating a lot of new pedestrian safety improvements into it. So it's really, I mean, it is an exciting project. It takes a long time. You guys, just like you look at Smith and Carthage, 561, it seems like it took a long time. It was really 2.5 years. This one's a much bigger project, there's a lot more money going out. And then hopefully all of you saw the news and saw the information about the Elm Avenue Stormwater project. We were really Noah and I and others were feeling really defeated because the engineering, the projections came in, and then we didn't have the money in place. And we basically went to Hamilton County Commissioners with their hat out and said, we need your help, and we need more. And they, Noah uses the word generously. I use the word, rightfully, because we are Hamilton County. We're Hamilton County residents. They're our commissioners. We're asking for help, and they did it. They stepped up and helped us. So we're able to move forward with that project now. And I'm telling you, that is such a big win for the city to get that detention moved and trying to get that moved forward. And I know the law director and Tim, the assistant law director, have been working a lot with Noah on making sure that we're getting things moving in the right direction. But that Elm Avenue project is really going to be, I feel, transformational for that area that has always been plagued with this problem. And now we're going to eliminate that problem, and I think you'll see pride in ownership and a lot of improvements just because the people recognize we're putting a big investment right there in their area. Over the last few days, we've had the winter solstice with the luminaries out. Debbie and I, my wife and I, drove around the city sort of looking at all the different people that did some extra decorating. That was really nice to see. The Norwood Moose Lodge posted their 2024 winner of the most beautiful and spectacular holiday light display contest on the Facebook page, so hopefully you've seen that. I got to actually work the kettle this Saturday at Kroger for the Salvation Army. The Salvation Army does so many good things, not just helping families, but in the recovery part of it, and then also disaster relief. So I just spent a small amount of time out there, ringing the bell, trying to get people to drop a little bit of spare change in the kettle. And it's really great to see. I mean, the holiday, you can't feel the holiday spirit anymore than that with people dropping just some spare change in there, and it's really one of the good things. And then I wanted to talk just real briefly on the old Perry and Derrick site, because this is another brownfield. This was actually an EPA Superfund site at one time. Perry and Derrick made paints there, but then once it got sold, they put a bunch of barrels there, and it is owned by the Port Authority, and it's listed under Ready. And they actually got a grant to do some development, trying to figure it out, and then they've been working on other grants. But this is information that will be coming to you guys as hopefully a developer gets involved in that site and we see some redevelopment up in that area. That has been an eyesore and is just a mess of a building that's had so many different hurdles, but they are being overcome. And then the last part is, there used to be a request for ordinance form that we all had to use, and those requests for ordinance forms went out with the packets. So there was an ordinance that you guys received, but it had who requested it, and it had information, and I think it was implemented by the law department. I think Keith implemented it. I know it was there 10 or 15 years ago, but it came in our packet. I don't get it in my packet that I received. Maybe you guys are seeing some of that, but it clearly specified by the person who was requesting it, do you want all 3 readings? And if it's information, you guys keep on saying, I'm not sure if we need 3 readings on this or not. It definitely specified, and the reason why you wanted those 3 readings. And I think we should ask the clerk's office to start, and maybe the law director's office, to make sure those go with the drafts to the office so that you guys have those. They should be in your packet, should be able to read it, say, where'd this come from? And, if it's Noah, right away, call Noah up here because he's got the answers. So, but it was a good form that we had in place years ago, and if we're not getting it, we should get it started again. So that's all I had.
Thank you. Any questions for Mayor Snyder? All right, Mr. Moore?
Thanks for, I will say just on that, we do try to get those forms in fact, when I get an email, I try to fill out the form on behalf of whoever sends me the email asking for an ordinance. Most of this was the Planning Commission and just trying to get through it. It didn't even occur to me to add forms on top of that. So I kind of apologize for that. But yeah, those are valuable, and I understand that it's hard to know who needs what when it comes in. And sometimes I'm willing to raise my hand, but not everybody is, and interrupt your meeting. But I want to thank everybody for all the work from the clerk's office, and my office, Carrie at the building department, to try to get all of these put together in a way that made sense and in the right order. So I hope the meeting went as smoothly as it possibly could. And look at this, it's not even 9:30, so it's way better than I ever anticipated. So my thanks to everyone involved in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Moore? All right, moving on to unfinished business. Do we have any unfinished business? Mrs. Hoover?
I'll be so fast. Want to let folks know that the banner has been ordered for the MLK, Norwood celebrates MLK for the week of service and a blood drive. You'll start seeing the flyers out. The blood drive will be on January the 11th at the Gatherall at Factory 52. And then we have a bunch of really phenomenal volunteer opportunities at Norwood social service programs, from food pantries to, we're hoping to get into Dress for Success. We have a phenomenal IV abatement program, which I'm super excited about, Save the Trees. So we'll be seeing that. So hope that folks take advantage of that next month. That is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other unfinished business? Any new business? Mrs. Franzen?
Yeah, so I will be scheduling an infrastructure committee meeting in part to talk about the PLK development, both north and south of Robertson. I don't necessarily want to set an exact date, because my feeling is I want to make sure that Mr. Lingenfelter or someone else from PLK can come. But in general, those on the infrastructure committee does Wednesday or Thursday at 6 tend to work okay? No.
I will say, from now until January 5th, my work schedule is nuts.
Oh, it would be after January 5th.
Okay, no. Usually I am unavailable Wednesday through Saturday evenings.
In that case, would a Tuesday that is not otherwise accompanied by a council meeting work, or potentially before council? Okay, because it would be a committee meeting, I would want to try to have it here, so I'll check the schedule and I'll check with Mr. Lingenfelter's schedule. My plan is, once I set a date, I wanted to try to distribute flyers to all of the houses in that area, at least within a block or two of the planned development, both on Robertson, south and north. So that's kind of my plan once I figure out a date. So I'll be in contact with the infrastructure committee folks to make that happen. But obviously, anyone else that would like to come too, even if you're not on it, it would be a good discussion, I think. I'll try to make sure we have plenty of time and it does not run into any other meetings, so people don't feel rushed. So just want to put that out there. This would be after January 5th. So we're not going to do anything in the next 2 weeks, because too much happening. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other new business? Mrs. Bowling?
Yeah, this is not in Norwood, but everyone from Norwood is welcome to attend, and it is not too far away. With the holidays coming up tomorrow, being Christmas Eve, Good Plates Eatery, I think we talked about this at Thanksgiving as well, is doing holiday meals, no reasons, no questions, no charge. They bag them up to go, and you can take as many as you need and take them to go. They're doing roasted chicken, mashed potatoes and gravy, green beans and stuffing, bread and rolls, cookies and baked goods, delicious. This year they also added a free toy gift shop, and I will be there all morning wrapping presents if you need them wrapped. So it opens at 11:30 tomorrow. If you need a Christmas meal for any reason, if you just live alone and don't want to cook a whole meal, if you need them for any reason, just show up and come get you a delicious meal.
Thank you. Any other new business? All right. Then we will move on to communications. The first is a letter from Mr. Powers regarding a request for executive session.
Dear Council President Gears, I request an executive session at the Norwood City Council meeting on December 23rd, 2024, under Ohio Revised Code 121.22 G4, for the purpose of preparing for conducting or reviewing negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment. Sincerely, City Service Director Noah Powers.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling,
Do I need to motion that we both receive this and that we enter executive session
for the purpose
for the
of,
purpose stated in the communications? How about that?
all right. Per the law department, that works. Mr. Garten.
Second motion.
Seconded by Mr. Garten. Any discussion? Motion on the floor is to receive and file the letter and to enter executive sessions per the purpose stated within the communication. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. We will enter into executive session, so I will ask for cameras and microphones to be turned off. Anyone not employed by the city of Norwood is asked to exit council chambers. The only matters that we will take care of after returning from executive session are to receive and file another communication and then adjourn. So at this point, if we can have sound and cameras off and everyone from executive session. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, we have a communication from Mayor Victor Schneider regarding mayor's courts fines for November 2024. Mrs. Franzen.
Make a motion that we receive and file this communication as if read.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to receive and file as if read. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winchbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Okay.
All members present voting yes. We have no absent members. Is there a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Bowling,
I move we adjourn.
is there a second? Mr. Gerton?
I second the motion.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling, second by Mr. Gerton to adjourn. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winchbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Everyone have a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. We'll see you in 2025. This meeting is hereby adjourned.
Merry Christmas.